The Game Schooler Podcast, a proud member of the Dice Tower Network, is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll revisit Marvel United, our game of the week, discuss instant turnoffs in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high 5 great games that need new art. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's happening, Doug? Great to see you, man. How are you?
I am fantastic. Living the dream.
Good.
How about you?
Yeah, likewise. Every day, right?
All right. So we're trying a new setup here. Hopefully the audio quality and everything is kosher and good on your end, dear listener. But,
yeah, and it is on our end. I also went through and did a frequency count. This is our 27th different setup out of 157 episodes. So nobody can question our commitment to continuous improvement or your commitment to quality, Doug.
Yeah, well, we're trying to get, hopefully we'll be able to get more content out in different places and kind of expand our reach is the plan with this. So if all goes according to plan, there will also be a video version of this coming out almost simultaneously with the regular podcast. So if you want to see our ugly faces, you'll be able to do that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any follow-up from last week?
Not from last week. How about you?
I've got an interesting story to tell if you want me to go into story mode.
Go.
So on our Discord, there was discussion about Small World, the game Small World by Days of Wonder. And one of the users on Discord had mentioned that they played it with their then boyfriend. If I'm remembering, it may have been their first date. They played this. They have since been married, and we're bringing out Small World with their kiddo for the first time. So a full circle moment for them. But it reminded me of a story. I have a story about Small World that I wanted to share, and I think there's some cool takeaways from this. My brother, who is not a gamer, although he will play games with me, and every New Year's he gets together with a couple that they're friends with. Him and his wife get together with this other couple, and it's always kind of a tradition that somebody brings a board game and they play. And typically it's one of those where it's like Outburst or what apples to apples, whatever the kind of hotness is at the time in that party genre. But this one particular year, they brought Small World over, which I was kind of shocked by. I'm like, well, that's a little bit more gamery than they're used to. And so I asked my brother how it went, and he says, oh, it went great. I mean, that's a long game, isn't it? I'm like, well, I mean, maybe. I mean, a little bit longer than, maybe Ticket to Ride or something like that. And he's like, yeah, it took us 3 hours. And I gave him the blinking eye emoji. I said, yeah, 3 hours? How did this possibly take 3 hours?
I know that look well, by the way.
Do you? Yeah.
Yes.
Michael gets it a lot. And so, but they had a good time, right? So that's the important part. And there was nothing of like, oh, well, it just dragged. I didn't get the typical gamer response of like, it was a little draggy in the middle, and then it picked up, but I don't know, turn to turn, not a lot for me to do type of thing. So they didn't have that. But it did occur to me the idea of non-gamers playing games and how that could be a complete turnoff to them as they tried to gather the rules and figure it out, and it takes forever.
I see what you did there.
Or it could be great. And there's nothing. So I'm just curious to be the awareness of playing with non-gamers and what games you're introducing to them. And in that case, I'm convinced that the environment and the people that they're playing with made up for, if you and I were stuck in that world of that game of Small World, would have been, this is a disaster.
So how did it take 3 hours? What am I missing here?
I think they got some rule wrong of where it was.
So no kidney transplant in the middle. Nothing like that.
No emergency room visit.
All joking aside, my father has had a kidney transplant, so I think I could say that without offending any of our listeners.
Did it happen
right?
during
I've
a game of Small World?
There. What's
Did
that?
it happen during a game of Small World, though?
No, but now I'm kind of regretting that I didn't take that moment to bond with Dr. McCabe and the real doctor, right? And take him up Small World and play that with him. That would have been a good father-son moment. But I didn't mean to jump in on your story, Doug.
No, that's okay. So I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what all of the implications are, but I just think it's one of those things to be aware of with non-gamers, gamers, and what makes a good experience and what makes a bad experience.
Yeah, and that's where I hesitate when people ask about gaming recommendations. And I really have, 6 or 7 that are now go-tos of whether it's Point Salad or Game of the Week this week, Marvel United. I have a handful when people ask, well, what do you think I should? And, we've talked about this in other School of Gaming episodes, but it's so environment dependent, right?
Yeah.
Gaming and who you're playing with, where you're playing, time of day, all of those things matter. That's interesting.
Well, and it's a thing where recently at the end of last year we did our top 50 family games of all time, and that's why a game like Green Team Wins is on the top of the list.
Yep.
Because I know I can give that to people and recommend it to people. The rules aren't going to get messed up, and they're going to have a fun time playing, and it kind of mitigates a lot of those other factors that can come into a game.
Yeah, and it works in multiple settings. It works in a corporate setting. It works in a school setting. What games can you play with a 6th grade English language arts class when you're a substitute teacher, and also as an icebreaker activity in a corporate setting? Well, that's one. So
yeah, exactly.
Good stuff, Doug.
All right. And what else do you have for follow-up?
Well, I don't have much for follow-up. I have what's awesome with gaming. I've got a lot of awesome things to talk about. But follow-up, I feel like we buttoned that up well last week. I appreciated the homework activity. I was hoping for another assignment, maybe some magazines from circa 2016 or even newer 2020 to dive through to see what's still hot and trending. But
only if you have a pair of white cotton gloves so you don't tarnish those magazines.
Hey, don't tarnish my name. I returned those magazines in mint condition. They came back as 10 out of 10.
All right. What's awesome in gaming, Michael?
Well, I got to tell you, I brought a prop with me, but I asked the kiddos and my family, what's one game for us to replay? What do we want to play again? Let's get a game off the shelf and play again. And for those of you who are watching, I'm holding up What the Cup from the Op, a 2023 game, I want to say, right? This is one that just came out last year that I think in a lot of places has come and gone, except in our house. That was one that my 11-year-old said, hey, we should play What the Cup again. And instantly 8-year-old, yeah. And my wife was saying, yeah, let's play it. So we're going to be playing that in the upcoming days, very likely at like a Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon, What the Cup. So I know we have some traveling this weekend. We're going to go see Abuelita and spend time with family. And in the days gone past of where I would pack 18 games into my van, now it's pretty much, What the Cup and maybe take 5. But that's awesome when you have a handful of games that the family's excited to play again. So I'm looking forward to playing that this weekend. I have 2 other games to share about, but I don't want to hog the whole segment. I'll send it back to you, Doug.
Well, one of the things that was awesome to me and I was surprised by was Michael shared an image with me, a screenshot.
Oh, yeah, we're going there.
Somebody who their wallet exploded and managed to buy about 40 games. And they took a picture and posted it online. And I was under the impression, go ahead.
Not just online, to the Board Game Geek Facebook page.
Okay.
Now I'll send it back.
So I'm expecting that person to just get destroyed mercilessly by gamers, and they did not. And it did highlight something that Michael and I have talked about, and we have coined as new gamer enthusiasm, and people making comments about, yes, I was also like that when I first got into the hobby and just buy anything and everything I see and you get it. And then it isn't until I think you start accumulating a bunch of those that then you realize, I don't have time to play all of these.
Yeah, and in that picture, there is a copy of Othello, Twister, Checkers, and Chinese Checkers. But then very quickly, it goes into Villainous, Arc Nova, Lords of Waterdeep, Dead of Winter, Pandemic, Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, Obscurio, Domino Maze, Jenga, Fox in the Forest is thrown in. You see some really good tasting games of the week. Maybe they're possible listeners. But the comment is, this is getting out of control. This isn't even everything I've picked up in the past 4 weeks. Someone separate me from my bank account. And I was immediately expecting, oh, they are going to get beat up. And people in the comments were very much, oh, hang in there. Welcome. There was a lot of welcoming. And then you could see the more experienced gamers, they weren't beating this person up or saying, well, you should. It was very much of, yeah, when I have somebody new who joins our game group, I tell them, try not to buy anything in the first year. And people were really dropping some nuggets of wisdom in there. And I love that about the hobby, that at times when I'm thinking it's going to go one way, it quickly will pivot the other way. And you see the kind people that are out there.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, how about a game you played, Michael?
Yeah, 2 other games. One that I've been playing solo that I'm excited to try with you in the next couple weeks and see if it hits a mark or if it goes into that near miss category. But that's Pioneer Rails. Again, I've only played it solo because I'm trying hard not to turn my children into mini reviewers, and I want them to be able to like their father. But Pioneer Rails is a flip and write game with just some beautiful art and a little mechanism where you're making poker hands to score out little points. Matthew Dunstan, and then Jeffrey D. Allers, who did New York Slice, which is a game that I know that you like. Just been having a ton of fun with that one when I have 20 minutes, 22 minutes to play a game and want to decompress. I am in a phase right now where I'm trying to learn games slowly. So I'm trying not to consume games. I'm really trying to, play 3 or 4 times, and so that I know that I could teach a game. And I know that I could play that game if I walk into a middle school classroom or if I walk over to your house, just get the box out and play it. And if I'm still having fun, 6 or 8 times after playing, then I hope somebody else will have fun with it too. So that's been awesome, and that's different. Whereas in the past, I'll try to learn 10 or 12 games to get ready for this convention or get ready for this game day. Just a new approach. And I'm having fun doing that, even though it's all by myself at the moment. Potential fun for future, right?
Well, that's the idea of appreciating what you have instead of constantly looking for what you don't,
more.
And more. And, this one's rated high on Board Game Geek. I got to get on it. It's like, just play the games you have.
And then flipping the coin on the other side of the hotness and the hype, jumping on that train a little bit, I've been playing a game called Forest Shuffle on Board Game Arena, and I've been playing with a friend of ours and his father. I've been getting completely destroyed. And I mean like losing by 100 when he has 200. And that's slight exaggeration. I had 110, he had 200. But in Forest Shuffle, you are laying cards out and just trying to trigger off amazing combinations. And I want to talk more about it because here's the good news. I got it in a trade. And so that was just another thing that I think is awesome about the hobby, right? I was very persistent. I was probably turned down 8 or 9 times, but then finally someone said, yeah, I'll take that trade. And so that will be arriving in the next day or so. And I look forward to bringing that over to headquarters and getting that played with you. Dan, the friend that we play with, if he's listening, we won't play with Dan initially. We're going to make sure that we're both up on the rules and ready. He is quite good at that game. I am quite bad at that game. But here's what's awesome about it. I still enjoy it.
Yeah,
I enjoy trying to find those combinations and having a strategy. And what I don't know about it, if I'm going to like the bookkeeping, because in playing that game, I wonder what would have happened if the game Earth would have had a great implementation on Board Game Arena, and I would have liked that more. Because I don't know if me having to do all the math versus the Board Game Arena doing the math, how that's going to impact that. But I've had a ton of fun playing that. We played last week one night. together, and then I've been playing it asynchronously. And like I said, just getting trounced, but enjoying it enough where it's like, okay, I want to play this with other people. I'd like to play this with Doug. I'd like to play this with my wife. I have a brother-in-law that I know I'm going to want to play this with. So that was another thing that's just awesome, seeing those new games that are continuing to come out, and oftentimes in a virtual environment, playing it first, that try before you buy. That's something that 2 years ago I would have been more intimidated. Like, no, I actually have to try that in person. No, now I'm playing it online and helping to discern if it's something I want to bring in my collection or even try for our listeners. So, again, more games to see if they're going to fit as potential games of the week.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, too, because the idea of try before you buy, and in that case, trying it digitally. And I imagine there are some cases where you could try something digitally and be like, all right, I don't need to play this again. I kind of get the gist of it. So a great tool there in passing. And it'll be interesting to see then if there's also the possibility that I played it digitally, it handled a lot of the bookkeeping, and now that I have to do it, it seems like it's taking me out of the game. And if it's how good of a try before you buy indicator it is, or if that, there's some other levels that you have to keep track of while you're testing something out, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what's awesome in gaming this week is just staying curious and wanting to learn more, play more games, play with all different types of people, play with my friends, play with the same people. It's just an awesome hobby that way.
Yeah, awesome. All right, before we move on, if you like what we're doing, spread the word about the podcast. We'd really appreciate that. Let anyone you know that you think would like what we're doing, let them know about our show. If you want to join a group of like-minded individuals, check out our Discord at gameschooler.com/Discord. Again, gameschooler.com/Discord. A great community there of listeners that are always talking about family games, thrift store shopping. Whew, that's a tongue twister for me. And recommendations and game night and family games, children's games, gamer games, all that stuff. So check that out, gameschooler.com/Discord. And if you have any questions for us, you can email us, email at gameschooler.com. Again, email at gameschooler.com. And we're also on the Discord, too. So if you have a question, feel free to shoot it there, and we'll hopefully respond to it. Now, with that out of the way, let's move on to the game of the week, Marvel United.
The game of the week.
I'm glad everyone gets to see you do that now.
The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Marvel United. Doug, give us the stats.
All right. We are revisiting this game. It was the very first game that we talked about on the podcast. We are now officially what would be 3 years of episodes later, and we thought it'd be a great time to revisit this one with fresh set of eyes and maybe better quality. Published in 2020 by Simon and Spin Master Games. The designer are Andrea Cherivisio and Eric M. Lang. And the art is by Edward Guillotin. 1 to 4 players, 40 minutes. The box says 14 plus. I'm suspecting that has to do with the miniatures and not getting it tested as a plastic toy for a choking hazard. Board Game Geek says 8 plus, and I think that's spot on. I think 8 plus is very doable with this game, and it would be considered a family game. In Marvel United, you take the role of our iconic Marvel heroes cooperating to stop the master plan of a powerful villain controlled by the game. Each villain unveils their unique master plan with cards that trigger different effects and threats that pose challenges across the locations. Heroes must choose carefully the cards to play from their unique deck, and not only offer different actions and superpowers to use, but also combine with the actions of the other heroes to do the impossible. Build your storyline, unite your powers, and save the day. On your turn, you've got a hand of 3 cards. You are going to play one of those cards into a timeline, and on the bottom of the card, there are abilities that match. Everybody else has the same abilities. There are move, there is fighting, heroic action. That's it, right?
Yep.
The three different icons, and then potentially a wild. You are going to play your card down, take the actions on your card and the symbols on the card, the hero card that was played before you. So as the game goes along, you're creating kind of this storyline, and not only are you helping the next player, you're using the abilities from the player that went before you to try and beat the villain. There are locations spread around in a circle that you move throughout. There are threats on each location, and thugs and civilians. You use fight to get rid of or attack to get rid of the villains, and heroic actions to rescue the civilians. As you reduce the threat, you then get the opportunity to then attack the main villain. And the main villain is going to take a turn every 3 turns. So there's going to be 3 heroic turns, and then a villain turn, 3 heroic turns. But as you start removing those threats from the board, the villain is going to start ramping up, and he'll start going every 2 turns instead of every 3. And they're going to be moving around the board. They're going to be attacking you. If you're attacked, you need to discard cards, which is thwarting what you can do. If you happen to lose all of the cards from your hand, you get knocked down, and you could get back up later. But so there's no real dying and kind of getting knocked out of the game. But where this game shines is that the heroes that you choose all kind of have unique abilities and strengths and weaknesses where, for example, the Incredible Hulk is a very powerful character. He has a lot of attack, but he can also do a lot of collateral damage that's not great. But he's harder to, he doesn't move around as well as maybe some of the other characters. And Captain America is going to have more heroic actions maybe than some of the other characters, and more of a helper character than kind of a lead guy. So there are a lot of variations among the heroes and what they can do. The base game, I think, comes with 3 villains that you can play against, and each one of those kind of has a different framework of what you're trying to do to defeat them and attack them as well. How's that sound?
That's phenomenal. I think we should jump in and talk about what we love about the game and what makes this cooperative so different from others, and really dive in on some of the educational skills that come with repeated plays as well. But we could take it there's a lot of different directions we could go here, Doug, with this game.
Yes. Let's just start with what we like. I mean, this is going to be a thing where we'll talk about what we like, things to kind of be aware of. And then I'm also interested in the thoughts compared to where we were 3 years ago as well.
Very good. And I did not look back because I wanted to be fresh. So if you did, yep. I'll be interested to hear some of that. I love the hand management mixed with the cooperative nature of the game. The being able to figure out which card and ability I'm going to play so that I can maximize what I'm going to do on my turn and set up the next person while also looking at what was played on the turn before me. It is a cooperative hand management, and one in which, when you talked about you think you can play with 8-year-old kiddos, yes, it's possible to play with 8-year-old kiddos, but I think that would almost need to be like an open hand management to help and facilitate. And at the same time, a game where you could have a lot of fun playing with your family can also scale up very nicely to game groups and can go right through school settings. And so this is a game where you can play with multiple different groups. It's come up on so many different high fives over the years for us because of, I think, just the flexibility and the ease of play. You don't have a ton of cards in your hand. You're not managing 12 cards, right? 3 cards. One decision to make with those 3 cards that will impact what the next person's going to do. And I also have to kind of figure out what the last person did and how I'm going to take those actions. I love that part of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I like that you kind of mentioned is that there's a scalability with this game where you can take out some of the wild cards, which makes it harder. So you can scale that all the way down from younger kids up to gamers and have an equal challenge across the board. But the big thing about that is I love the variety, and especially there are a bunch of expansions out for this game. There are 3 standalone expansions and X-Men, Multiverse, and Spider-Geddon that are available now. The Multiverse one might not be. But with that being said, there's a lot of variety in this game without altering the entire system. There's not a whole bunch of extra rules I need to learn. The abilities, so each character comes with their standard icons, and then they might have three or four out of their 12 cards that have a special ability that only they can do. But they're not. This is not a game where you're having to stop and look in the rule book. It's this guy's got this ability, and you do it. There's no consulting afterwards, and even the villains, what they're tweaking, it's written out on the card that you're playing with. So there's no. I'm just amazed by the simplicity with the variety, because normally those two things don't go together. Normally, if there's variety, it's a whole bunch of appendages and weird things where it's like, oh, I don't want to play with that. This is pretty much, I had my cousin over and his kids, and it was one of those things where it's like, pick your favorite hero. Here's all the heroes. Pick whichever one you want. And everybody picked out their favorite hero. We picked a villain, and we went after it. And it was set up and taught, that the teaching in this so easy to get up and going, which is what makes this a great game.
Yeah, the rulebook's excellent as well, right? You mentioned that you don't have to go to the rule book, but I had in the last 3 years at some point, I had a Marvel United game where I was well over a year removed from playing. So I needed to do a quick scan, get it set up in the classroom, get the pieces out, and we were up and running and playing. And oh, by the way, I just have the base game. So whether it was $22 at Walmart or $24 at Amazon, wherever it was or wherever I got it, it's the game that you would get off the shelf, compared to an all-in Kickstarter experience or event like you might have with your cousin and your nieces. It's pick your favorite one, and out of these 100 characters, we're going to go have a great time. Both are very memorable, and the fact that you have a thin rule book where everything is just clearly laid out for you and you can get it up and running, I think says a lot about why you and I keep coming back to this game.
Yeah, and the art direction is awesome too. It's very unique, fun art style that I think is originally, when I backed this game on Kickstarter, I backed it because I thought, you know what, even if the game is terrible, I'm going to have fun. I wanted to paint those minis that come in the box. To my surprise, the game is awesome, but the art direction is really cool and cohesive. It's not one where it's stills or comic book art. It's all new, fresh artwork for the game. And the affordability of this game, I think right now on Amazon, you might be able to get the base game, a Spider-Man expansion, and a Doctor Strange character for about $26. And sometimes around the holidays, I think I might have picked it up for $9. I picked up a second copy of those just because I was like, it's such a good deal, I can't pass it up.
Yeah, listen to this. Amazon, $16.96. Noble Knight has them from $15. And Miniature Market has it for $27.99. So you're looking at full MSRP right now, all the way down to $16.96. So it is an incredible game for what you can get dollar for dollar. And that hasn't changed over 3 years. I mean, we said that at the beginning when we first played it.
So what, without, obviously you didn't look back, but what are your thoughts about Marvel United today compared to what you may have thought 3 years ago?
Well, it has stood the test of time. In that still relatively short period of time, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about back then. I mean, just the simplicity of play, the multi-generational aspect of it. I know that's something that we had talked about leading into that first episode, but this is one you could play with your kids and even your parents and guide both groups through, right?
Yeah.
And so a game that you could play with 80-year-olds up to 8-year-olds, there aren't a ton of games that have a well-known IP, an intellectual property that you can actually just sit down and play together and have a good time. How about you?
I admire this game more now than I did back then. And I think it's because of the simplicity and the amount of games that I've played in the past 3 years, and kind of the direction of the industry as a whole, where things are, in my opinion, sometimes overly complicated. And I admire the fact that they were able to come up with a simple system that is robust enough for a huge Marvel fan like myself, yet completely approachable for somebody that isn't familiar with Marvel, in a cooperative system that doesn't feel bloated.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's still getting attention and love from some of the bigger reviewers 3 years later, that they're
The
still
A-listers.
Yeah, yeah, not D boys like us. I appreciate that more now than I probably did at the time. As far as other things to be aware of, there are I mentioned them earlier. There's some standalone expansions, but on Amazon you can get a bunch of other ones. So if you're a fan of Thor or Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, things like that, you can add some of those characters in, and that's a lot more available than it was when we first talked about it. When we first talked about it, excuse me, you could only pretty much get the base game and maybe one other expansion, and now it's a lot easier to get some of the other expansions that may have had Kickstarter exclusive stuff in them at the time.
We'll tell people your half-price books story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I picked up a whole set of the Kickstarter exclusive bundles at half-price books for an insane low amount.
And so now I have a list of games that if they're ever at a thrift store, I'll snag them. And I've played with a few of the Marvel expansions, but I had just an incredible time playing with the Into the Spider-Verse. And I hope I'm saying that one right. Isn't that the one that we had played with the different villains? Or
no, we played the Sinister Six.
There it is. That's one. This is why I keep notes, people. Google Keep saves my life. But it was one of those where Doug has it, and we played it at a game day and just had an absolute blast. It's like, yeah, if I ever come across that one, I'd love to pick it up. But then the other side of my brain says, why? Doug already has it. Just play it again over at his house. And I think for me, that's what's changed from episode 1 when we first recorded, in January of 2021 to today. It's being able to enjoy other people's games and not having to own every single game in the universe or the Spider-Verse, whichever you prefer. That's really what Marvel United holds for me as well. There's a great playmat to this game. They're just awesome little features. And if you look, if you're watching at home, the minis are just beautifully painted, not by me, of course, but by my friend Doug, because he's a good friend like that. He painted my minis. So a lot of different places that the game goes. And again, I just have the base version. And frankly, that's probably all that I will ever have unless I just magically stumble across the Spider-Verse expansion in a thrift store. If I happen to be in Southern California or wherever the people live on our Discord, the suburbs of Chicagoland, and stumble across a wonderful thrift store find. But here in Southern Wisconsin, I have not been as fortunate as Doug with coming across some of those other pieces of this. It's almost like its
was a
own
unicorn
book series. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is, for those of you that don't know or are into the concept of game schooling, on our Discord server, we do have 2 skill builders and a discussion guide that are free to download. And you might be asking yourself, what is a skill builder and a discussion guide? Well, I'll start with the discussion guide. Discussion guide is a simple list of questions about the game, strategy, and design that if you're using this in the classroom and you wanna play this game, or you're playing it with your kids at home and you want to kind of dig a little bit deeper and talk about strategy or how the game was designed and works, the discussion guide is an awesome tool for that. The skill builders are activities that you can do.
Hold on, let's pause on that before we go into that, because with the discussion guide, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what are some of the skills that you will build in that discussion guide? You're going to have reflection on action. What did we do in that game, and what could I have done differently? And cognitively, that is such a wonderful little skill builder within that discussion guide, not to mix our own previous terms. But then the communication. This is a skill right now that especially anyone who has a teenager to a teenager who is living in devices and really from 17, to 13 years old right now. Well, yeah, like they're going to want to talk to me about a game. Well, you don't have to print out the discussion guide and make it feel like homework. If you play this game, you can grab a couple of those questions and just have that back and forth. This isn't just for 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. Right now, anyone who's working with high schoolers will know verbal communication is a lagging skill in a lot of places. And Marvel United is an interesting enough game where I do think you can get some of those quiet kids of, what'd you do at school today? Well, how'd practice go? Fine. You can get more of a back and forth from the discussion guide that we have out there. So I just wanted to pause on that before I send it back to you, Doug.
No, awesome. I appreciate that. The other thing we have is a couple of skill builders, and those are activities that you can do once you've played the game, after you've played the game, that kind of mix it up and make you reflect. And it's more of an activity as opposed to just a discussion or reflection. We have one about creating your own hero and creating a new location.
Location. That one is fun. That one I did with my own kids. You basically create a location and then you use it within your game. If you have a little printer at home, and it doesn't have to be color printer, but if you want to go all out and go to your local Walgreens or someplace and have them print it for you, you can use it right in the game.
Yeah, which is based on the fact that it's a simple system to kind of implement and add new things into it. So, and with the other one where you're making your own hero, you're using cards that are already in the game. So you don't even need to do anything else. You kind of shuffle stuff up together. And so if you're looking for an activity that goes beyond of just playing the game, and certainly just playing the game, there are a bunch of skills that are in the game. And one of the ones that I really appreciate in this game that's not in a lot, and it's the way that the turn structure works, is selflessness. And that's a game that inspires players to put the needs of others in front of their own. Because sometimes when you're playing this game, you need to look at, how can I help the next person instead of me having a super awesome turn? Because sometimes what the group needs is just you need to play your card with movement on it because the other person needs to get out of harm's way or they need to do something else. And I think this game is really good at doing that a lot of cooperative games aren't. It's just, I want to have a super awesome turn. I want to go in. I want to beat up a whole bunch of thugs. And
I'm
going to
do this without consulting anyone else at the table because I want to do it. That's like what I think of as, I'm going to eat the candy, right? I'm going to eat the candy because I want to eat the candy because it will feel good. I don't want those eat the candy moments in a lot of cooperative games because that means other people at the table are watching you eat the candy and then have to deal with the side effects of that, right? Yeah. And I feel like in Marvel United, the other thing that goes with that selflessness, that's a great call out, Doug, is processing information with direction following. So we define processing information as a game in which players must examine or analyze information. You have to be looking at the board and what's happening. Where are those civilians coming out? How many thugs are in each location that I should try to clear? Combining that with direction following, not so much with the gamers, but if you're playing with kiddos and if you're looking at skills that you're trying to increase and improve, and direction following is, it urges players to play according to a set of rules and constraints dictated by the game designer. What you were just talking about there with the selflessness, I might have a very clear thought of how I want to use this wild on the card. But as soon as I go to lay it down, another player makes another suggestion. It's like, yeah, you're right. That's actually the best way for me to use this card. And being able to not just follow directions of the game, but of the other people at the table. And that is really unique in this cooperative. And there are other cooperatives that we've had that have games of the week. I'm thinking of like Horrified or even Disney's Animated, where you don't have to necessarily follow the will of the people at the table as much as Marvel United, because you are a team of superheroes here trying to take on this villain in a unique way.
Yeah, no, it's great. And that leads to problem solving as another skill of figuring out, you're talking about processing that information and to figure out what the problem is and how to solve it, and then ultimately making that decision to go forward. And the villains provide unique opportunities in different scenarios depending on what villain you're playing with, which is a whole other avenue of replayability and variety. And sometimes you can play with a villain, and some heroes might be better suited to attack that villain compared to a different one. And mixing all of those combinations up is really cool and provides a lot of unique opportunities. Anything else? I mean, I think this fits well for folks who love Marvel, but it's also great for families, and I think it can work really well in the classroom as well.
Yeah. The only note of caution, and this is new, but I'm not going to say it's wisdom, so take it for what it's worth. But I do think there needs to be a minimal, and I mean minimal, interest in the Marvel intellectual property. So my oldest kiddo is now 14. We've watched the entire MCU together and most of the shows. We have a little catch up to do on season 2 of at least one show, Loki. My middle and youngest children are not into Marvel yet, growth mindset. But my youngest loves superheroes. So I could get this game to the table tonight with my 8-year-old. She'd play it no problem and want to know more about the characters. But my 11-year-old, there's 15 other games that she'd want to play. She's just not interested in even trying it. And so that's just to the parents out there. You know your kids, but and to the educators out there. I think just a little tiny interest, meaning they've watched one movie, I think is enough of an interest. But I did want to share that. Even the mileage varies even within my own house with my 3 kiddos.
Well, and I think there's also an element of, if you've got a classroom, this is a great way to get young boys interested into a game, where a lot of times I feel like I don't want to play this other thing, or that's whatever. It's like, this would be a great opportunity. I know of a couple of family friends where I'm thinking, if I could get this in front of them in the classroom, that could really get them to hunker down, right? And maybe they're bouncing off the walls and things like that. So that's another arrow in your quiver as far as where this game fits. Is I don't want to play that other game, or meeting them that theme as a motivator.
Better get a sign-up sheet, though. That's the only thing I'll say, that because of the limit at 4, if you're doing this in the classroom, educators, make sure you have a way to make sure that kids get a turn to play. Well, this was one that when I took into board game club, same 3 people were always going after to grab it. And I didn't have the experience of thinking, ooh, what if others want to play? It was kind of a little game group would just go and play it. But that is, have a process in place so that everyone gets to play, because it's a fun one.
Yeah. So that is our game of the week. Let us know what you think about it on our Discord, or send us an email. We'd love to hear how you feel about it, certainly 3 years after we originally discussed it. And we still think it's a great game, Marvel United. Now let's move on to the School of Gaming.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we're going to discuss instant turnoffs.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic, and I think it's obviously there's a little bit of, I guess, value of knowing. I always think whenever you're listening to a podcast or somebody and you're learning about, and they're talking about games that they're recommending, it's good to know what they do and do not like, right?
Yeah.
So you can kind of get a baseline where if I tell you I hate a certain style of game and that's your favorite style of game, then maybe you would look at that a little bit closer. So there's kind of a learning aspect to this for our audience. The other thing that I think this is good at is you and I have taken the time and kind of synthesized what turns us off to a game, what maybe is like, I'm not so sure about that. And I think that's something for, as we talk about avoiding hype and acquiring new games and stuff like that, the better that you have a better understanding you have of yourself and the games that you like and enjoy, the better chance you have of avoiding the pitfalls of having too many games that you don't play or are sitting on the shelf for a longer period of time. So I think this segment kind of has two cool purposes to it.
Yeah, I would just add another prong or another branch to the tree, whichever analogy you prefer. I don't know where prong would fit on the analogy tree. But before a game can get to a game of the week for our podcast, we have to both agree on it. There are few things where consensus is needed in life, and consensus is needed to be a game of the week. We both have to be able to stand by it.
Yeah.
So I think that's another helpful area for just this segment and to give it some context.
Yeah.
What approach do you want to go? Do you want to go in general? Do you want to?
Well,
are we talking about games or people? How do you want to take this?
I've got, of course, a general caveat up front is there are exceptions to all of these rules. So I kind of broke down my list into
For Doug.
kind of what's that?
For Doug. My rules have no exceptions. Go on. Back to you.
I broke mine down into mechanisms and then kind of game specs. And I can think for everything that I've put on the list, I have an exception of a game that I love that follows these things. But by and large, it's a general rule that you're going to have to do something special to make me take a second look, I guess. How about you?
So I went in general, and then I broke it down to solo, 2-player, and 3-player plus, and just talking.
Okay. So are yours specific games?
No, but I get specific within those 4 categories.
Okay. All right. Fire away. Let me know what you got.
Well, in general, an instant turnoff for me is if I feel, and again, these are very subjective, right?
Yeah.
And I think with this and with our high five today, this is subjective, but is a lack of direct personal agency. If I don't feel like I can make a decision, if I am overly reliant on the game or feel like there's too much constraints within the game, sometimes that's where cooperatives don't work for me, where I feel like, man, this feels like work. Because at my day job, in my regular job, I work very closely with the same group of people. And I want to feel when I'm playing a board game like I'm making some decisions. Yeah. And even in some of the cooperatives that we have reviewed lately or our game of the week this week, that's what I love about them. I feel like I'm contributing to the team where what I say matters. And when I don't have that in a game right away, I don't feel compelled to want to play it again. So that's one that's, I think, unique for me. And we talk about it a lot in the game schooling area as well. But it's a big thing for me with the hobby.
It's interesting because yours is, and I don't know if the rest of your list is like that, but I only actually have one thing on my list that is almost a post-game turnoff.
Check off?
Of after playing it. So for me, like one of them, there are a handful of mechanisms that I'm not going to jump up and down for. And that's real-time games because they add a level of stress that just drives me bonkers. And my day job sometimes is putting out fires that are on huge time constraints. I need this email to come in now, and get stuff taken care of. So I don't need that in my leisure time.
Yeah.
Another one is bluffing, and that's more of a skill thing because I feel like I'm terrible at it. For a guy that went to school for theater and acting, I feel like when I need to bluff in a game, I cannot find myself out of a paper bag.
And you hate it, don't you? I mean, I've played a few bluffing games with you, and you could just audibly hear your I
cannot. I feel like I overthink. I'm like the guy in Princess Bride. That's like, you think that I know that you think that and work myself into this conundrum, and it's like I throw it out there, and it seems like every time I do it, it's always the time, whether it's like, I like Sheriff of Nottingham, but it is one of those where it's like, okay, the one time that I'm going to try and bluff and throw something out there, of course that's the time my bag gets opened, And it just always seems like it. I always end up on the short side of it, which just frustrates the heck out of me.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other one for me, it's a post game where I know, and I think it really has to do with this podcast, Doug. I think if we did not have this podcast, I wouldn't care about this nearly enough. But I cannot stand. And again, this is very unique because usually we're about all things that are positive, so we're getting a little pithy here. But I cannot stand when there is PG-13 or R-rated content in a PG package. And what I mean by that, in the United States, for films, we have a rating guide, right? PG is parental guidance. PG-13 is for 13-year-olds on up. Rated R is going to be, you should be 17-year-olds on up. And of course, that's subjective too, but there are look-fors with that. And I can think of one game that we played that I just had a ton of fun playing it. And I thought, oh, this would work really good in the middle school board game club. And then you showed me the card of this villainous assassin holding a dagger that had some blood dripping on it, And I'm like, it's not that that's not family friendly, but it's not family friendly. And there's just a level of gore and violence where it's like, man, that game would work so well for, I could think of 2 or 3, kiddos that would enjoy playing the game. But then you have that one image, and that image was not on the box. On the box, it's very vibrant, colors and nice images where it looks like, oh, this is a family-friendly fantasy game. And so that frustrates me when I feel like, oh, I can't take this game into the audience that I want to take it into.
Well, or some sort of scantily clad person or something like that. And it's one of those things where it's like on one card, and it's like, this didn't need to be in the game, and now it's completely kept it from a whole other audience that could enjoy it. And not that I have a problem with the dagger or anything like that. It's not one of those where it's like, nobody should ever be playing this game because it has that. It's like, that's not the case. It's just how close you are to getting into a completely different market and audience.
Yeah.
Because of one or two choices in a game. That's a great one. Similar, I guess, on a line to that of, I guess this would be a post-game thing that I didn't discover until after playing these type of games a couple times, and that's one versus many games. And the constraint or the problem that I usually have with them is that it is fun. I like being on both sides of that equation, right? I don't
like
mind
being the shark and killing the shark.
Exactly. The problem is, for me with those games, is if you are the shark, you cannot just mop the floor with the other group of people or whatever. If you are the one, you can't just go roughshod over everybody else at the table and be like, well, I'm winning, which is awesome, because then everybody else has a terrible time. It's just, it's so frustrating. And then if you're on the other side and you're just getting beat down by the one, it's demoralizing. And so I feel like I have not come across a game where I felt like both sides can go at it 100% and it works out okay.
Yeah.
I always feel like the person that is the one almost has to be a game manager as opposed to actually participating in the game. It's like a dungeon master and kind of choreographing the game, because I played one and a game of Descent, and I was the big bad guy, and it's like I'm pulling off all these combos and it's feeling awesome, and I'm looking across the table and it's like they're having a terrible time.
They're
like
getting destroyed.
I need to tone this down, which then just like, what am I here for? And
You're
some people
better
are
human than me, Doug. I would have turned it up to a Spinal Tap 11. I would
But
say,
some people are
we're
really
going to race
good at
towards
that.
the end game right now.
Some people are really good at that, though. Like our buddy Dan, I've played some one versus many games with him, and he does a really good job of just kind of keeping the flow and everybody's having fun. And maybe it's my own fault for going into it with a different expectation, but there are games that I have found very difficult to get to the table. And when somebody says, oh, it's a one versus many game, my blinders kind of go up. It's like, not for me.
Interesting. All right. Where do you want to go next with this? Because I have... Do you have anything else on your list here?
Oh, I've got a bunch of stuff.
Me too.
Let me get to kind of some of the stats stuff. So if I'm hear about a new game and I go to Board Game Geek, there are going to be, if I see that it's over 2 hours, if the complexity is 3 or higher, it's going to be a hard hurdle for that game to overcome.
It's a harder sell for you.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of those like, you got to be getting then you have to get to the point where it's like mechanisms I love, a theme I love, and other things that kind of counterbalance that, where like Distilled would be a great example of, or Scarface 1920, where it's like it is hitting both of those numbers, but the theme and the artwork bring it up to a level that it's like, okay, I want to take a second look at this.
Yeah.
But my instant reaction is to check those numbers, not only because I don't think I don't enjoy those type of games. I just know that I don't have the time to get those games played.
Yeah, when you see there's almost a multiplier there. Sorry to interrupt, but if it's a 3.0 complexity in 2 hours, that's for me, not you, because you might be a smarter dude than me, but that's going to mean 5 to 6 hours of investment just to get that game through startup, right?
Yeah.
To understand the rules, to get it set up on the table. I almost need to multiply the wait times the time to see what it's going to take to get this thing up and running. And that's...
Well, and it becomes a thing where it's like, I only have so much time to have that many... I can only have so many 2-hour games in my collection because they're not getting played at a regular basis. I know you have talked about sometimes it's like, if I could get this game played once every 2 years, I'm doing okay. And I've got enough of those games that fit that criteria that adding another 2-hour, 3 complexity game is not going to.
So what would you suggest for a new gamer then, who's just coming in and who maybe they play a Dune Imperium or they play a Distilled? They're like, boy, I really liked that. How should they approach? You have any words of wisdom to pass on?
I think it ultimately comes down to how much time you have and whether you have a regular gaming group.
Yeah.
And how much time you're actually gaming. If I was single, had no kids, and every Saturday at noon I was going to a board game store and I knew that I was going to be there for the next 8 hours, think about how that would change the games that you pick out and select, right? What are you laughing at, Michael?
I'm trying to imagine you without a wife and kids and having your Saturday free. I'm trying to imagine what your hairstyle would look like, your clothes. I just got a real image there, Doug. I'm trying to place you in a certain locale in the United States. That was good. Good image.
It probably would be the exact same as it is now. I would just be a shell of a man. But I think that's probably the biggest qualifier of that, right? If you're just getting into the hobby new and you play it and you love that game and you step back and say, I'm only gaming 2 hours, 3 hours a week. Am I going to play Dune every?
Do I have the people to share the experience with too?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a critical factor. Even when you talked about the variables that are in my life, but then I have to get other people to invest in it as well. Yeah. Right? And if it's a convention, okay, that's one thing. But who are the people I'm regularly playing games with? That's good.
What else you got?
Well, I have solo, 2-player, and then 3-player. And in solo, I have 3 things I'll just rattle off quickly because I've talked about these things in the past in our opening segment. But number 1 is being able to see the game. And I'm colorblind, and more than once I'll get a blue or purple meeple and I can't tell them apart, or a red and green cube. And if I'm playing a game alone, boy, is that frustrating, you know? And then
look at all these resources I have.
Yeah, exactly. And then I don't want to be rule booking to death for the opponent's turn. I'm playing a game solo. Yeah, I better have an Ottawa that's clear, right?
Yeah.
An automatic opponent here where it's happening really quick. Boom, boom, boom. Here's what's happening. I'm consulting the rule book to see what one of those 6 things does, and I'm moving on. Lost Ruins of Arnak has a great little bot. Guild of Merchant Explorers has a great little bot. A game called Carnegie, same thing, where it's just, this is my opponent's turn, back to my turn. And then the third thing, and this has to go with all three categories, the game's got to be fun. If I get done with a game, and if there's not that feeling of satisfaction, if it just feels like work, I'm better off to go do the dishes or do laundry and help out some other people, right, in my own house. Like, the game's got to have a fun factor to it.
Yeah. That leads into one of mine, which is one of the few post-game things, is if there's, and we've talked about this before, but if there's too much stuff, if it's fiddly, and if there's, kind of seems highbrow to say, but if there are elements of the game that I deem unnecessary, where it's like it didn't need all of these extra parts, the core of the game is enjoyable, but I have to do all this other stuff, and I think that's what kind of pushes it into that work element that you're talking about for me, is that once there's all these things, like I can't keep track of all this stuff. I mean, you and I, and that's season of life stuff. That's you and I working all day, you game later at night.
Yep.
I don't have the mental capacity or stamina to be managing too much.
Yeah, and then the other time would be if I am gaming with my family on the weekend. I don't want to just be GMing that game all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to be able to play it and have some fun with the kids too and talk about the choices that they're making. I don't want to just be a perpetual bookkeeping and cleaner-upper. I can do that outside of the board game table, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good point.
The last one I've got is the aesthetic and artwork. It is just as much... Artwork will draw me into a game just as much as it will repel me from a game. When I see it on the table or you're walking through a convention and you see a demo set up and it's like, yeah, that just... And I'm not talking about like what you were talking about earlier where it's something that's objectionable or something like that. It's just like the art style doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
And I have a less, there's a lot of Euros or games that are more drab or kind of muted in colors that I don't gravitate towards. It's like, I need some vibrancy. I want something. If there's an art style, I want it to be very deliberate and chosen for a reason. And so it's a kind of a yin and yang where it's just as much as it is a turnoff as it is a turn on of like, I am now interested in this game because of the artwork, and change my mind from there, right?
Yeah, that's where I think people who are just coming into the hobby, even within the last decade, are pretty spoiled because the art is so good a lot of times. And my last instant turnoff has to do with that as well, and that's a rule book. I talked about it a little bit with playing a game solo, but even if I'm playing with my family or if we're reviewing a game and playing it, I need a good, clean rule book that is memorable so I know where to go to get clarification, and that I can get that quickly. Don't give me a 14-page rule book for a 30-minute roll and write.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I really don't want a 4-page rule book for a 3-hour game.
Yeah.
So just making sure that the rule book makes sense and explains the rules of the game. And I know as saying that sentence out loud doesn't make sense, but we are in a hobby that is global. And so oftentimes you can tell when rules have been translated or mistranslated and there's a lot of different people that go into the project of a board game, right? And sometimes the rule book just doesn't match the game.
Well, and sometimes
I probably trade away more than a few than I care to admit in sold off games where it's like, no, the rule book it was awful.
Well, and you hit on it there with the translation. It's like sometimes there's just a turn of phrase in a different language that does not carry over and have the same type of meaning where it's like becomes word jumbly.
Like a triple negative?
Yeah. Wait, what is this saying exactly? And it was probably one word in a different language that everybody knows. And then it just gets crossed over in that same thing. And it's like, it's taking what sometimes where there's a game that if you get a demo of it, you know it instantly. And if you read the rules for it, you're like, how exactly does this work? That type of thing is a big deal in games as well. So cool. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, we talked about artwork, so let's move on to our high five where we talk about some great games that may be lacking in just a little bit. if you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about our high five games, great games that need new artwork. Now, can I say something snarky for once in this podcast, Michael?
Sure.
All right. Well, we try to stay on the positive side of things, right? And I wanted to have this topic be great games that need new art. Because if we were just talking about games that need new art, we could spend 2.5 hours going through Rio Grande's entire library.
Hey, not a sponsor, but never going to be a sponsor with that. They make some good games with horrendous artwork.
Yes, they
I've
do.
got Bonanza.
Yeah. I think everybody's got a story about a Rio Grande game with their artwork.
Beyond the Sun.
Could use some fresh blood in that art department. But we want to talk about
Jeepers, Doug.
we want to talk about great games that we think would be even better if the art got updated. Any caveats, things that you want to point out before we start?
Nope.
Okay. But Michael's like, I've got 5 Rio Grande games on this list.
Well, I'm getting my backup list now. But no, number 5 for me is a 2014 release that has had a ton of success. It has a wonderful app, and it's been re-implemented a few different times, and that is Star Realms. Star Realms is designed by Robert Doherty. Publisher is Wise Wizard Games. And in Star Realms, you're playing in the base game, at least, you're playing it with one of the 4 different factions, and you are it's a deck builder. So you're getting cards out of your hand, and you're trying to destroy your opponent. It is an awesome 2-player game. Like I said, has a great app. But you could tell that there's been, 10 years have gone by. And I love the space theme with all the different ships in that. But I would just I'd be interested to see a little fresh coat of paint on that. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's one that could use an update.
Yeah, it's not one that I immediately think of as one that I'm disappointed or lacking in the art. So my number 5 might get some flack for me, but I'm going to go with Terraforming Mars. 2016 Fricks Games and designer Jacob Frixilius. In Terraforming Mars, you're competing with rival CEOs to make Mars habitable as you build your corporate empire. This has a little bit of it's almost like a combined photo art with not being real art, and it seems very clip arty type of thing, like stock photos, and as a result, it kind of takes me out of the game because it doesn't feel as cohesive as I think it should be. And I think they improved it a little bit on the Terraforming Mars Ares expedition. But that original graphic design and some of the artwork on the cards of Terraforming Mars are just, like I said, I think the big word for this one for me is it's not cohesive. It doesn't look like it was all done by the same person. So that's my number 5, Terraforming Mars.
Excellent. My number 4 is going to get severe pushback from Doug. It was a recommended game of the week in episode 54. Also a Spiel des Jahres, and the art is one by Beth Sobel. I would love to see...
Oh, wait, you think this needs to be improved?
Yes. Here, let me get the name of the game out. It's Cascadia. Here's what I am so tired of beautiful animals. I want a version where there
filthy,
are...
ugly animals.
Ugly animals. I want some dirty snow. I want some dogs that need a bath. All right, maybe some combos that run through either Seattle or Vancouver. Don't give me a pretty eagle's nest. I'm going to get the animal people after us, Doug, and I'm an animal person myself. But in half seriousness, I'm done with pretty animals. I'm done with beautiful animals. I want to give me something where there's a little bit of ugly nature in it. I'm not saying that the grizzly bear has to have the dagger in its hand, right? But this is a great game. I think this is just something that I'm burned out on the animal scene, and I would love to see a spin on it where instead of the expansion that comes out as Landmarks, we get a realistic animal depiction.
I'm
so the
burnt
art's
out.
too good, Doug. It's just way too good.
I think I'm going to make a T-shirt for you that says I'm burnt out on the animal scene.
Hey,
Michael
I'll wear it. I'll wear it with pride. Tell me.
Michael wants a game with a bear ripping apart a tent in a campsite.
Yes, I would play that game. I would play
believe
that
you
game
would.
before I would play the bear being a pirate.
So is this game? I'm confused. Is this a game that is you're frustrated? I feel like this is a representative
beautiful.
game.
It's too
Representative
beautiful.
game of the animals as far as nature. Like, is it representative of the abundance of the nature theme, or is it representative of the animals taking the place of humans?
Yes.
Both.
The first one.
Okay. So just the idea of
it's way too beautiful. It's way too clean. And I love the Pacific Northwest. Been there multiple times. Great part of the country. But I want a little bit more imperfection in my games these days. Instead of it's just way too beautiful.
All right. My number 4 is I don't know. I don't know if Michael knows about this game. And it's one that I would probably have in my collection if it looked better. And it was published in 2012, and it's called Keyflower by R&D Games, Sebastian Bleasdale and Richard Breeze. Have you seen this game, Michael?
Yes.
Oh, it is like it dropped out of Microsoft Word. You compete in a unique auction system to build the most prosperous village. And it has this thing where you're placing your colored meeples on tiles in order to try and claim them, and then you get those meeples back and put them out, and then you add the tile to your city, and you're kind of moving around. It's a really cool game, and I think it's in the BGG Top 100, so it's well regarded, but it is not enjoyable to look at. And I don't even know, Michael, if you'd be able to play it with the colors of the cubes and stuff.
Thanks a lot, Doug.
Sorry. It's an instant turnoff for you, Michael.
Yes. Can't see it.
So that is my number 4, Keyflower, an awesome game that if it was reprinted and had some updated art, it would totally be in my collection.
Interesting. We're all the way up to number 3, and my number 3 is a game from 2002. It's one we have talked about a few different times on the podcast, and that's Pirates Cove, Days of Wonder. I would just love to see an updated version with a fresh coat of paint on it, and one in which would be widely available so more people could play this 3 to 5 player pirate adventure. It is a lot of fun, but it's one where I think it could use some new paint.
Yep, I agree with that. My number 3 is Flashpoint Fire Rescue. This one came out in 2011, Indie Boards and Cards and Kevin Lansing. It was one of those first cooperative games that kind of came out after pandemic that, it was based on real life. It wasn't some fantasy world and things like that. And it is a game in which you are a fire crew and you are trying to put out a fire in a house, rescue the people, and get them out of there. And there are a couple of different modules that you can play that add chemical areas and things that might blow up and spread fire. And there's hot spots and smoke, and it's a really cool system. Might be a little bit outdated now, but still not a lot of those games based in reality. But the board, again, another board that looks like it was made with Corel paint and just kind of clip art type thing that if it were coming out today would never pass muster at all. But a great game. Am I being too harsh, Michael?
We both are, Doug.
I'm saying they're great games. I love
they
the
are
games.
great games. No, these are all great games, and that's why I think we're just peeling the lid off and just going to town on them.
I want right now they're A's. I want them to be A pluses.
Yes.
So that's my number 3, Flashpoint Fire Rescue.
Excellent. And so if we have experienced listeners that are listening to us, we might be angering them a little bit. I mean, what is Michael talking about with Cascadia? Needs dirty animals and the art's too beautiful. But my number 2 is one that I don't think the experienced gamers will argue with, and that is Agricola. Agricola 2007, Uwe Rosenberg, that has about 18 different versions out, but each one seems to be a little bit uglier than the last. And I like Clemens Franz's art in a lot of different games, but my goodness, there's just something a little too cartoony. We are on video, Doug.
I know. That's why I did that.
There's just something a little too cartoony about an amazing game where you take these little micro actions over time, and then all of a sudden you have 5 to 10 moments in the game where it feels like there's nothing I can do. This is awful. This is terrible. And you're looking down at your cartoonish farm and realizing you either can't feed people or animals aren't going to be able to multiply the way that they should, just trying to keep things family friendly here on the Game Schooler podcast. But I would like to see one that actually has Beth Sobel art. See, going full circle there. I think you take the Cascadia art, bring that into Agricola.
So if it had nicer animals in it, you'd be all about it.
Yeah.
Okay. My number 2, Michael just was in awe with the cover of this game, and that was Dominion. Published in 2008. They actually did a reprint in 2016 with some different art.
Got crushed.
Still don't think it's good at all. That's by Rio Grande Games and Donald X. Vaccarino. It's a great game. It's the grandfather of deck building games. I want a edition with artwork and graphic, and maybe part of it too is just like the graphic design is uninteresting as well. So there's the artwork, and then there's all of the stuff around the artwork that just seems kind of ho-hum to me.
I'm glad you agree that Dominion's a great game, Doug.
I never said it wasn't. I just didn't say that the cover should bring you into the hobby. But I think it's one that it's like I'd love to have like a deluxe version or something that's like redone and just fancier. Get that art up. And again, this is another one where here's a good example. Lorcana, Disney Lorcana, has different artists for all of the cards, right? The same thing that Dominion does. Dominion has a whole bunch of different artists in the same way that Magic does it. However, Disney Lorcana seems completely uniform as a cohesive game, and Dominion and kind of Magic the Gathering just seem kind of scattershot to me. So that cohesiveness throughout a design is really important to me. So that's why my number 2 is Dominion.
Interesting. I'll push back, but I'll wait till after the podcast is concluded. You can't do a super deluxe. They've got like 14 expansions. Imagine the size of the box. It'd be like 3 times the size of the Castles of Burgundy box.
Yeah, you need a full 2x4 Calyx shelf to hold everything.
You would, to make it up to your standards. I like it. All right, I'll push back now. My number 1 game that could use new art, great game of the week back in episode 66, and that's For Sale. For Sale is a game where you have 2 phases in it. One where you're bidding to buy the homes, and then the second phase where you're selling them off for contracts. And it's from 1997. I just have the little travel edition from Eagle Griffin Games, so I'm sure as soon as this concludes, somebody's going to send me, here's an edition from Korea that has beautiful art, just like Reiner Knizia's Money or any of those other games that I could have picked from this era. But I would love to see, and I don't need 15 more player powers. I'm usually a person who loves player powers, but just the basic version of the cards with some nicer paint, or maybe even like some actual homes, real life pictures of homes. I think would be a cool way to go too. What's that?
I said that could get nasty. That's my home on number 1. A good example of this, though, by the way, of talking about Reiner Knizia and is in the same product line, the Eagle Griffin bookshelf thing was High Society. Originally came out from Eagle Griffin, and it got republished by Osprey Games, and that game is beautiful. And the original one is in that same world where it's like, so a great example of artwork being redone and just like bringing a whole new life onto the game.
Yeah, and For Sale's designed by Stefan Dora, and like I said, we talked about that at length in episode 66. Another example of that is Reiner Knizia's Money, which I had in the Cascadia slot until about 5 minutes before we aired. That's why I had to call the audible with Cascadia. But Money did just get a fresh coat of paint, Doug, and it looks beautiful. So
I haven't seen that. I'll have to check that one out. My number one, it is my number one spot, not because I think it's the worst art. It's just the one that I wish was updated the most. And the thing that makes this tricky is that this publisher's other games are beautiful, and this is one of their first game, and I think it shows. And that is Trekking the National Parks from Underdog Games and Charlie Bink. Awesome game, awesome theme. I love it, but when I compare it and it sits on my shelf next to Trekking the World and Trekking Through History and Her Story, it becomes which one of these doesn't belong. And I wish it could get updated to the same quality and level that the other games have, which is why it's my number one. Again, these are all great games. I love all of the games on my list, so it's nothing.
A lot of them have been games of the week.
Nothing that I'm saying is bad about them. I would love to have that on the same level, in my opinion, as the other two in that series. So
and
that
art
is my number
is
one.
Subjective. So can't wait to hear what people have to say on the Discord about this.
Any honorable mentions?
No.
I had Cursed Court, which is a cool little bit. What is this? Thumbs up it put on my screen. Cursed Court and Lost Cities was another one that, although I don't think, and Lost Cities went to honorable mention because they did do an update on it. And there's not much you can do with it. But the version that I have is like, and again, I don't know what it's honorable mention because I don't like the artwork, but I don't know what you do to improve it either.
Yeah.
And Cursed Court has kind of hyper realistic art that just kind of takes it out of. It's a little bizarre for me that I just think they could change that around. So those are some games, like Michael said. Love to hear what you guys think in the Discord. Tell us why we were wrong and which ones you think could use an update. We would appreciate that. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Next week, don't hold us to this, but we have penciled in Color Brain, Fighting the Inner Completionist, and retail games that feel deluxe. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.